abortion, reversing both Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. This case represents the first time in America's history that the Supreme Court has revoked a constitutionally protected right. The first time. As a result, a woman's personal decision to make her own reproductive health care choices is no longer protected or guaranteed by the Constitution. In the words of Justices Kagan, Sotomayor, and Breyer, the conservative majority has, quote, consigned women to second-class citizenship. In overturning Roe, the Supreme Court has unleashed a health care crisis across America. Make no mistake, women's health and in some cases their lives are at risk. Today, the committee will examine the very real consequences of the court's unprecedented decision. We'll start with a video.
Roe versus Wade, upholding that Mississippi law, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization.
Could pregnancy loss land people in prison?
We already have seen examples of this. Pregnant people being criminalized for pregnancy outcomes, miscarriages, and or self-managed abortion.
Data collected from fertility apps and Google searches could be used to prosecute abortion.
Black women and other women of color are disproportionately criminalized.
Some of the bans do have civil and criminal penalties. They're difficult to interpret in terms of how they will be enforced.
We send patients with prescriptions for ibuprofen for pain control during medication abortion, and the pharmacy is refusing to fill it.
Every kind of woman gets abortions. Women who are young, women who are old, women of all races, women who never thought that they would be seeking an abortion.
If I'm not mature enough to make a decision to have a child, I'm definitely not mature enough to have one.
I'm not financially stable. I'm already struggling with the 4 that I have.
What if I have another high-risk pregnancy that puts my own life at risk? I do want another baby, and now I'm scared to.
I no longer have those rights that we always looked at Western countries and Western women as having.
You see efforts to punish women and efforts to turn neighbors into bounty hunters of sort.
We end up having more abortions because of a lack of access to reproductive health of choices, including contraception. This law is not just about abortion, it's about reproductive health.
Women are going to die as a result of this. There will be doctors who hesitate to act because they're worried about breaking the law and going to jail, and women will suffer and they will die.
Since the Dobbs decision, at least 10 states have banned abortion. More are expected to join them. The bans we've seen include insufficient and confusing exceptions for the life of the mother. Many do not even provide exceptions for rape or incest. When they do, they're unwieldy and inadequate. So what exactly do these efforts to ban abortion mean in the real world? They mean that a woman facing complications in pregnancy could die waiting in the hallway of a hospital because a doctor must weigh the risk of jail time against making the best decision for the health of the patient. And they mean that individuals and organizations who help someone travel to a state like my state of Illinois, where abortion is legal, may face legal liability. Consider a letter sent to the Sidley Austin law firm last week by a group of conservative Texas lawmakers, which threatened to, quote, impose additional civil and criminal sanctions on law firms that pay for abortions or abortion travel. Some Republican state lawmakers have even sought to punish women seeking abortions. For example, in Louisiana, Republican legislators sought to advance a bill in May that would have subjected women who terminate pregnancy to charges of criminal homicide. In his majority opinion, Justice Alito claims that by overturning Roe and Casey, the court was simply returning the power to decide how abortion may be regulated to the states. But Dobbs raises many questions with no answers, leaving health care providers and patients to navigate new restrictions that will likely and rightfully face further constitutional challenge. For example, in his concurring opinion, Justice Kavanaugh insists that a state cannot infringe on the, quote, constitutional right to interstate travel, close quote. Well, it seems some state Republican lawmakers didn't get the message. They are proposing bills that will turn their state borders into checkpoint Charlies for patients seeking abortions in out of state. In a post-Roe America, it is not only abortion rights that are in peril. Other constitutional rights are under threat. And that's not my conclusion. It's Justice Clarence Thomas's conclusion. According to him, your constitutional right to privacy is a fiction. In his concurring opinion, Justice Thomas declares that a court should, quote, eliminate the constitutional rights to birth control, marriage equality, and consensual relationships between LGBTQ people, close quote. This radical, regressive vision for America is eroding the court's institutional integrity. This comes in the aftermath of Republican leader McConnell's blocking President Obama's right to fill the Supreme Court vacancy. President Donald Trump pledged to appoint nominees who would overturn Roe versus Wade. That was the box each one of them had to check with the Federalist Society before they could appear before this committee. Today, 3 in 4 Americans say they've lost faith in the Supreme Court, a record low. It's easy to see why. Families are living in fear that some of their most cherished rights are now on the conservative chopping block. So what are we going to do to protect these rights? What are we going to do to defend women who have already had their rights revoked? We know the Republican plan. Win control of Congress and impose a federal ban on abortion. The Republican leader said as much. Democrats have a different plan. Protect your rights by entering a federal statutory right to an abortion. In fact, that's exactly what the vast majority of Americans support, keeping access to abortion legal. A woman's choice to get an abortion is her choice alone. Politicians have no business sitting in the waiting room with the doctor. And with that, I'll turn to Ranking Member Grassley for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very important hearing. I cast my first pro-life vote February 1972. As a member of the Iowa House of Representatives, there was a motion before the House to repeal Iowa's ban on abortion. I was one of 44 people in a 44-44 vote that voted not to repeal that bill, and obviously on a 44-44 vote, it didn't happen. Then next year, we had Roe v. Wade, and it was never an issue in the Iowa legislature until potentially it could be now as a result of Roe's overturn. We're here today because the Supreme Court has corrected a wrong that has impacted millions of lives since 1973. We're here because the Supreme Court, in a meticulous and well-reasoned opinion, returned the decision of abortion back to the states. For many Americans, this decision is about far more than correcting a flawed legal analysis in Roe. It means protecting the rights of the unborn. This ruling doesn't ban the practice of abortion, but instead empowers the people through their accounted elected representatives to make common sense policy decisions. It takes policy out of the hands of unelected judges. I understand with a decision of this magnitude comes differences of opinion and robust debate on the next steps. That's okay, and I welcome that. We live in a democracy, and with differences of opinion and passion for policies, all that followed by thoughtful debate can lead us to the best outcomes for the American people. However, the treatment of Supreme Court justices, pregnancy centers, and conservative women has been outrageous since Dobbs' decision was leaked. Remember this: 8 out of 10 Americans do not support abortion on demand right up to the time of birth. First, regardless of the views on this issue, we should all respect the role of our impartial judiciary and the decisions that it renders, seeking to intimidate or attack the court or undermine its credibility because of an outcome that you don't agree with is dangerous, and that's not an answer. Justices have had their addresses published online, have been subjected to illegal pressure campaigns at their family homes, and one justice was even the victim of an attempted assassination. I've called on the Justice Department to enforce the law and protect the justices and their families from these very real threats. The lack of a response from both the Justice Department and the White House is extremely disappointing. Along with the threats against the justices, threats against pro-life and crisis pregnancy centers have dramatically increased since the leak of the Dobbs decision by pro-abortion extremists such as Jane's Revenge and Ruth Sent Us. They've been at least 40 violent attacks on crisis pregnancy centers, religious institutions, and other pro-life entities since the Dobbs leak and before the court even issued its final opinion. The first pictures I have with me is a crisis pregnancy center in North Carolina that was vandalized with pro-abortion and pro-Antifa graffiti. That is in the corner. In the corner is the Antifa sign. Another one in Oregon was set on fire, causing significant damage, as you can see behind me. I pray for these centers and the thousands of patients they serve every day. I encourage all of my colleagues, as well as myself, to condemn the violence and vandalism. I want to ensure that these violent attacks are recognized by the FBI and are being properly investigated for what they are, cases of abortion-related violent extremism. Let me be clear, very clear. Threats and violence are not the answer. I also want to bring your attention to the incredible group of women that we have here with us today. We know women have been the center of the pro-life movement and tirelessly advocating for the lives of the unborn and the well-being of mothers everywhere. I'd like to introduce to you a few of these women, in addition to our witnesses, who I'll introduce in a moment. We have here with us today Dr. Christina Francis. Dr. Francis is an OB-GYN in Indiana. She's chair of the board of the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists and a board member of the Indiana Right to Life. Dr. Francis spent time working with orphans in Romania and Burma and working for 3 years as the only OB-GYN at a mission hospital in rural Kenya. She has dedicated her life, professionally and personally, to treating women, protecting the lives of the unborn, and educating people on the dangers of the abortion industry. We are also fortunate to have someone like her in the practice of medicine. Also, Catherine Glenn Foster, with us, who has in the past been a witness before this committee. She serves as President and CEO of the Americans United for Life. Catherine often shared her story of having an abortion at 19 due to the extreme emotional and psychological pressure she faced. Catherine felt alone after her decision. I'm sorry for the loss that you experienced, Catherine, and I hope that we can do better to give young women the love and support they deserve no matter what. Janet Durg is the executive director of the Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center, just down the road from us a short way. Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center provides compassionate care as well as complete, accurate information pertaining to pregnancy and pregnancy options. They too also have dealt with vandalism of their clinic. However, they continue to provide services such as counseling in childbirth and parenting classes. Thank you, Janet, for the work that the center does to serve those in D.C. area who need support the most. I also want to thank representatives of the incredible groups that we have here today: March for Life, Susan B. Anthony Liz, Concerned Women of America, Iowa Catholic Bishops, Family Research Council, to name a few. You'll also do incredible work in zealously advocating for the lives of the unborn as well as women's health, and for that I thank you. Let's have a productive discussion today on how we can best support women and families coming forward. But as I said before, threatening justices, pregnancy centers, and churches is not the answer. I hope the extreme rhetoric that gives rise to this violence won't be a part of our conversation today. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request to enter into the record the statements from Live Action and the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Thank you.
Without objection, and let me start on a positive and bipartisan note in light of your opening statement, Senator Grassley. I have stated time and again, political violence in furtherance of any cause is unacceptable, period. No matter who commits it, no matter what ideology fuels it. I condemn all violence and threats of violence in the strongest possible terms, whether the targets are pregnancy counseling centers or abortion clinics, period. Violence is never an appropriate form of protest. This committee has passed legislation that will protect our judges, and I'm glad we did it. I'm sorry to say that one of the most important bills, the Daniel Anderl Judicial Security and Privacy Act, which would give the Supreme Court police greater discretion in protecting the justices and their families, among other provisions to protect judges, has been held up on the floor, and I can say the person holding it up is a junior senator, Republican senator from Kentucky. I think it's a serious mistake. Lives are at risk as we fail to put this into law and to give even more resources to the judiciary to protect their members. Today we welcome 5 witnesses, and I thank them for joining us. Before we swear them in, I'll briefly introduce the Democratic witnesses, then turn to Senator Grassley to introduce the Republican witnesses. Our first witness is Illinois' Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. She's the 48th Lieutenant Governor in the history of our state. She previously served as a member of the Illinois House of Representatives, and I'm grateful for your traveling here, Lieutenant Governor. Professor Kiara Bridges, Professor of Law at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. I also want to thank Professor Bridges' mother, Deborah, who's here celebrating her birthday. So I understand she's in the audience, and we welcome her. Dr. Colleen Mcnicholas is an OBGYN and the Chief Medical Officer of Planned Parenthood of the St. Louis region in Southwest Missouri. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Mcnicholas. Now let me turn to Senator Grassley before I administer the oath for his introductions.
My first person is Denise Harley. Ms. Harley serves as Senior Counsel, Alliance Defending Freedom, where she's Director of the Center for Life. In this role, Ms. Harley leads her team's litigation and advocacy effort to defend pro-life legislation around the country. She also networks with pro-life allies, speaks publicly on behalf of her organization, and works to defend the First Amendment freedoms of pro-life health care professionals and pregnancy resource centers. Since joining ADF, Ms. Harley took the primary role in drafting the briefs to the U.S. Supreme Court in NIFLA versus Becerra, resulting in a free speech victory for California pro-life pregnancy centers. We welcome you. Next, we have Heidi Matzke. Ms. Matzke is Executive Director of the Alternative Pregnancy Center and has worked with them for 7 years. The center is a nonprofit pro-life women's medical clinic which seeks to address the holistic aspect of an unplanned pregnancy, including the medical, emotional, material, and spiritual needs of the mother. These services are free through the clinic. The center provides pregnancy tests, ultrasound, abortion pill reversals, STD testing and treatment, prenatal care, gynecological care, abortion recovery classes, and contraceptive education. Prior to working at the center, Ms. Matsky worked as Director of Health Services for the Christian Financial Strategies. We welcome you as well.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Let me explain the traditional procedure before the committee. Each of the witnesses will be given 5 minutes for an opening statement, then members will be recognized in order for 5 minutes of questioning. Before we proceed, though, I ask the witnesses to please stand and raise their right hand for the administration of an oath. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that all 5 witnesses have answered in the affirmative. And now for their opening statements, I first recognize Lieutenant Governor Stratton. Please proceed.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and the distinguished members of the Senate Judiciary Committee for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Juliana Stratton, Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Illinois, and I use she, her pronouns. Since coming into office, Governor J.B. Pritzker and I have been focused on the health, safety, and access to opportunities for all women of Illinois, of all backgrounds and ages. And one way that we've worked to make that a reality is by preserving and protecting legal abortion in Illinois. In 2019, Governor Pritzker signed the Reproductive Health Act, which enshrined reproductive rights into state law, repealed outdated laws criminalizing abortion, and requires private health insurance plans to cover abortion as the vital reproductive health procedure that it is. We made a vow that our state will be a beacon of hope for all. This was a promise that we made to the people of Illinois, and I come before you today because people throughout the entire Midwest are relying on our commitment to protect and preserve women's rights, namely the right to an abortion. It is no secret that Illinois stands out as one of the only states in the U.S. heartland where our laws on legal abortion have not been impacted by the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade. We are not just an oasis of reproductive care, but an island. And here's what that looks like. It looks like disenfranchised, yet determined patients coming from every surrounding state, but also from as far away as Tennessee, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, and Florida. It looks like the entire staff of our state's abortion clinics fielding phone calls for appointments because the number of out-of-state patients has doubled since Roe v. Wade was overturned. And that's on top of the nearly 10,000 women who already came to Illinois seeking abortion care, according to 2020 data by the Illinois Department of Public Health. In the coming months and years, these numbers will inevitably increase, and sadly, too, will the preventable suffering and pain of women and families across the nation facing the negative ramifications of a post-Roe America. Because of the history of systemic racism, we know that inequities are amplified within the Black and Latinx communities. A post-Roe America will be devastating for Black women, whose maternal mortality rate is already 2 to 3 times higher than that of white women because of structural racism and misogyny. One study projects that without safe and legal access to abortions, that number will increase by over 30% among Black women and nearly 20% for Hispanic women. Let's take a moment to just let that sink in. We are facing a future rife with needless death, despite 61% of Americans believing abortion should be legal in most or all cases, according to a Pew Research Center survey conducted in March 2022. It's hard to overestimate just how devastating the outcome of this ruling is and will be, despite our years of preparation. Before the threats to Roe v. Wade were fully realized, Illinois was proactive upholding bodily autonomy and protecting the right to an abortion. And still, the overturning of Roe v. Wade has sent us down a dark, agonizing path. The Supreme Court's decision does not, quote, leave abortion up to the states, when every state will be impacted. To be clear, this means every city, town, county, urban, suburban, and rural. And our rural and unincorporated areas already experience inequities when it comes to accessing health care overall. The weight of this ruling will surely be felt across state borders. In Illinois, and in states like ours, we are bracing for what is to come as these diverse communities across the nation turn to us. Governor Pritzker called on the president to move forward on key items that will address how states like ours will be affected, like creating a centralized hub for providers and patients to ease the burden on facility capacity amid higher demand. And most of all, Illinois and other states with legal abortion need more access to federal money to support demand. I commend President Biden for the steps he has taken to safeguard access to reproductive care through executive order on Friday, which included actions to expand access to contraceptives. This is a great start. In Illinois, all hands are on deck as we brace for what is coming, because we know we are the only lifeline for so many after so much has been taken away from women, from the American people. I say this not just as the Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, but as a mother of 4 daughters, my daughters who now have fewer rights than I had. In Illinois, and based on Justice Clarence Thomas's concurring opinion, it is likely this may not be the last rights that will be stripped from future generations, as access to contraceptives and the right to love and marry who you choose have already come under threat with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. In Illinois, we will not go back. We will not be silent or stand on the sidelines. And I thank Governor Pritzker, Illinois' legislative leaders, and our state's General Assembly, and all the community advocates who have joined forces to ensure just that. We already know how dangerous it is to turn back the clock of progress, and I ask each of you, as leaders, help us push forward before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement, Lieutenant Governor. We extended the period for your statement a little bit, and the same courtesy will be extended to all the witnesses. Ms. Harrell.
Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the committee, I'm Denise Harley, Senior Counsel and Director of the Center for Life at Alliance Defending Freedom. The Dobbs decision provides tremendous hope for women and unborn children across this country. For the first time in half a century, the people, through our elected representatives, have the legal authority to affirm the dignity of women and fully protect unborn babies. The Supreme Court was correct to overrule its egregious decision in Roe v. Wade, where 7 male justices insulted women's dignity by saying that motherhood forces upon us a distressful life and future. I'm here today with my own mom and my precious 4-month-old baby girl, and I have 2 children at home. I join with millions of mothers nationwide in saying that the ruling in Roe was a shameful, dehumanizing, and false characterization of the role that women and moms hold in our society. I know that every woman's story is unique, and for that some women, finding out you're pregnant is very difficult and unwelcome news. But pregnancy is not a barrier to success, and motherhood doesn't ruin a woman's chance to have a happy, fulfilled life. To say otherwise is demeaning and degrading. Dobbs was also a victory for the Constitution. As the decision explains, nothing in our Constitution's text, history, or structure supports a so-called right to abortion. Even constitutional law scholars who are pro-abortion have admitted this. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe said Roe was a verbal smokescreen and that the substantive judgment on which it rests is nowhere to be found. The late pro-abortion icon Justice Ginsburg called Roe a heavy-handed judicial intervention that was difficult to justify. And legally, scientifically, morally, it is. Under the Roe regime, the United States became an extreme outlier in abortion law. 75% of nations around the world don't permit elective abortion at all, or at most limit it to 12 weeks. But under Roe, the United States joined a handful of countries, including human rights abusers, China and North Korea, to allow abortion on demand after 20 weeks of pregnancy. The Dobbs decision unshackled states from this judicial power grab in Roe that was based on falsehoods about history and science. Now we can apply scientific knowledge that we've gained since that infamous decision. Medical advancements in the past 50 years have made it crystal clear that states have a compelling interest in protecting unborn children at every stage of development. With the help of ultrasounds, we've learned that babies in the first 12 weeks develop heartbeats and brainwaves. They move around and kick. They can hiccup, suck their thumbs, even taste what their mom eats. It's entirely reasonable and right for Americans to protect these tiny humans, and the American citizens are prepared to do so. In fact, reports that Americans supported Roe are extremely misleading. Roe allowed for abortion up to the moment of birth, but nearly 90% of Americans oppose abortion in the third trimester, let alone until birth. Now, for women who find themselves overwhelmed by the prospect of motherhood, there is hope, and it doesn't involve destroying the baby for a fee. We need to be pointing pregnant moms towards real help. Thousands of pregnancy resource centers around the nation stand ready to support women at no cost with tangible services both during and after a mother's pregnancy. Many states are also pouring resources into creative programs to ensure that every pregnant mom can access the critical support she needs. Churches, adoption agencies, and other civic organizations are redoubling their efforts. Dobbs marks a new day for our country, the opportunity to build a better society than the one the court forced upon us in 1973. A society that not only affirms that life is a human right, but that embraces motherhood by providing opportunities for women to thrive as moms. We as a nation can no longer use Roe as an excuse to treat pregnancy as a woman's problem that she alone must solve. It's time to implement innovative support systems and empower women to pursue full and flourishing lives for their families and themselves. The post-Roe legal landscape is changing as we speak, but I am so grateful that we're entering a new era where the American people have the opportunity to lead the world in upholding the dignity of women, of their children, and of human life. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Professor Bridges.
Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the Senate Committee on the Judiciary, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Kiara Bridges, and I am a professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. I'm here today to explain how the U.S. Supreme Court's radical decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization to take away constitutional protection for reproductive freedom harms people of color. In Dobbs, the court upheld Mississippi's ban on abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, and in the process, overturned Roe versus Wade. Dobbs declares that Roe erred when it interpreted the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause to protect a right to terminate a pre-viability pregnancy, insofar as that clause only protects rights that are, quote, deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition and implicit in the concept of ordered liberty, end quote. For the Dobbs majority, the country's laws in 1868, the year that the 14th Amendment was ratified, determine whether abortion rights can be so characterized. After canvassing abortion regulations in 1868, the majority concludes that abortion rights are not part of the nation's history and tradition. The painfully obvious point to make is that people with the capacity for pregnancy were not part of the body politic during the period of the nation's history that the majority believes is decisive of the constitutional inquiry. Women could not vote in the country for another half a century after 1868. Because women could not participate in the democratic process, one could reasonably assume that their interests were not reflected in any of the nation's laws, including the criminal laws that the Dobbs majority reads as foreclosing a constitutional right to terminate a pregnancy. Thus, the majority's decision to privilege the year 1868 and to attempt to divine the meaning of the Constitution by looking at the nation's practices during that time is a decision to privilege an era characterized by the formal exclusion of people with the capacity for pregnancy. People of color, specifically Black people, will feel the impact of the court's decision in Dobbs more than any other racial group. Black people's abortion rate is 3 to 4 times white people's abortion rate. This is a direct result of Black people's higher rate of unintended pregnancy, which in turn is due to higher rates of poverty among Black people. A frequently cited reason that individuals give for terminating an unintended pregnancy is that they cannot afford to have a child at that time. Thus, the unequal burden of poverty that Black people bear renders them more likely to face an unintended pregnancy in the first instance and, in the second instance, to lack the funds thought necessary to carry the pregnancy to term and raise the child. As such, when states are permitted to use the criminal or civil law to make abortion inaccessible, states render unavailable a service upon which Black people desperately rely. Further, the number of people of jails and prisons has grown tremendously since 1973. The incarcerated population has quadrupled in the last 40 years, with close to 2 million people confined in jails and prisons today. This is to say that the country currently is much more willing than it was in the generations that preceded Roe to turn to jails and prisons to address its social problems, both real or imagined. Moreover, there now exists precedent for punishing people for poor pregnancy outcomes, a precedent that simply did not exist during the era of criminal abortion laws that preceded Roe. In the 1980s, during the crack cocaine scare, states began to use creative interpretations of the criminal law to prosecute Black people who used the drug during their pregnancies. Arrests and prosecutions for substance use during pregnancy continue to the present. Further, criminal punishment of pregnant people who have suffered poor birth outcomes occur outside of the context of substance use. For example, prosecutors brought charges against a depressed pregnant woman who attempted suicide and suffered a miscarriage as a result. I could go on and on. Although a number of abortion rights opponents currently claim to consider the pregnant person who has an abortion to be a victim, I am skeptical about the sincerity or endurance of this belief in light of our current practice of punishing pregnant people for their pregnancy outcomes. Importantly, even if Black people attempted to self-manage abortion despite the threat of criminal punishment as frequently as people of other races, we should fully expect that Black people will be more frequently and more harshly punished for breaking the law. We should have this expectation because, as a general matter, Black people are more likely than their non-Black counterparts to be arrested, prosecuted, indicted, and convicted for the same conduct, and they serve longer sentences than their non-Black counterparts, even when controlling for relevant factors. In conclusion, I cannot overstate the level of harm and chaos that the Dobbs decision has already caused people seeking abortion care, providers, and practical support organizations. The crisis in access to abortion care in the United States highlights the need for a bold, holistic, and intersectional policy response that puts within its range of vision everything from the need for comprehensive paid family and medical leave to laws that urgently protect the right to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Ms. Metsky, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes.
Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the committee, thank you so much for the privilege and honor of being here today. My name is Heidi Matsky, and I'm the Executive Director of Alternatives Pregnancy Center in Sacramento, California. I came into this role by a roundabout road that began in a very emotional place. A number of years ago, on the day my sister and I were supposed to leave for college, she showed up at the door and collapsed on the ground. I said, "What's wrong?" as I looked into her eyes. She looked up at me and she said, "I'm pregnant." I still remember the fear in her eyes. I see that fear almost every single day in the eyes of women who come into our center. They need help, they need someone to talk to, and they need hope. I know because my sister needed all of those things. Our family needed all of those things, and we found them in a local pregnancy care center. And years later, because I wanted to give that same help and hope and support to others, I became the director at Alternatives. As an organization of mostly women serving women, the staff of our clinic offers our patients compassionate, holistic care, ministering in whatever gentle ways we can to their physical, emotional, and even spiritual needs. So it grieves me that since the Supreme Court announced its Dobbs decision, a great deal of misinformation has been spread about who we are and what we do. So let me share with you some of the facts. Our clinic is one of nearly 3,000 pregnancy care centers serving women across America. Each year, hundreds of thousands come to our clinics looking for free medical care, emotional support, and practical resources that will enable them to carry their pregnancies to term. Our clinic alone in Sacramento provides over $1 million of free medical services each year to women who come to us. We charge them nothing. That means we never financially benefit from any choice a woman makes. We make no profit of any kind off the women who turn to us for help. We offer pregnancy tests, ultrasounds, prenatal care up to 24 weeks, well woman visits. We test and treat for sexually transmitted diseases. We offer abortion pill reversal services, abortion recovery counseling, and parenting classes. And if finances are a problem, we have diapers, wipes, baby formula, baby food, baby clothing, baby supplies. And if a woman needs a hotel room, we provide that as well. We pay for all of that. It doesn't matter who she is, where she comes from, or what her past is. At our center, all medical services are provided by a staff of licensed medical professionals, including doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, and medical assistants. They are deeply compassionate people because most of them have experienced abortion for themselves. Our OBGYN doctor was an abortionist. When a woman comes in so afraid of what an unplanned pregnancy will mean for her life, her ambitions, her relationships, we do not urge her in that moment to make any decision. We listen, we try to hear her heart, we offer professional services and emotional support. Whether she chooses parenting, adoption, or abortion, we will continue to be there for her for years if necessary. Many women choose abortion because they lack the resources and support they need to confidently choose to parent. Over the last 5 years, American Pregnancy Care Centers have served nearly 2 million women who were faced with an unplanned pregnancy and wanted an alternative to abortion. Yet, pregnancy care centers from coast to coast are being targeted for violent assaults of vandalism and hateful attacks online and in the media. Just last week, as the exhibit shows, a man approached our care center with an armed machete. We have been forced to hire 24-hour on-site security. We've had to reinforce doors and bulletproof our walls. We've had to paint our building with anti-graffiti coating. We've added cameras, armed our staff with pepper spray, and stopped running our mobile clinic because of threats of violence. We have been forced to expend valuable resources for women of up to $150,000 just to protect ourselves. Why? Because we offer free care to women. What we do, though, is worth the risk. Every community needs a place for women facing unplanned pregnancies who are seeking dependable medical resources in a safe, caring environment during one of the most difficult times of their lives. You are pregnant. 3 of the most powerful words a woman will hear in her life. For some, the words bring incredible joy, and for others, incredible fear. Both deserve support. I thank you for the privilege of sharing with you a brief glimpse of hope, service, and compassion our pregnancy centers and so many others across this great country provide to women every single day.
Thank you, Ms. Matsky. Dr. Mcnicholas.
Thank you, Chair Durbin. My name is Dr. Colleen Mcnicholas, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a board-certified OBGYN trained to provide the full spectrum of sexual and reproductive health care, including abortion care. I practice in Missouri and Illinois, 2 states where people are living such vastly different realities that it should be considered by each one of you to be un-American. On June 24th, when the Supreme Court overruled Roe v. Wade, it effectively created 2 nations. One, where those whose reproductive freedom belongs to themselves, and another whose reproductive freedom belongs to a small group of politicians who have effectively appointed themselves as decision makers over our bodies, our lives, and our futures. Today, I'm here to speak for patients, the patients I serve every day, people from across the Midwest and South who navigate a ridiculous obstacle course just to access basic care. While it may take us years to understand how the Supreme Court decision in the Dobbs v. Jackson case will have impacted our public health outcomes, we already know, just 18 days into this post-Roe reality, how it's disastrously complicating people's lives and putting doctors in impossible situations. Since ceasing abortion care at our health center in St. Louis, which was the last remaining abortion clinic in Missouri, our health center in Illinois, just across the Mississippi River, has cared for patients who have traveled as far as 1,000 miles each way. Each one of those patients has told me they had no choice but to travel hours and hours for care. Almost overnight, our Illinois clinic has seen appointments triple, and that's already on top of a double book schedule we were sustaining in the wake of Texas and Oklahoma's abortion bans. As we've long said, overturning Roe will not stop the need for abortion. The Supreme Court's decision has already pushed people, the people each one of you represents, into extreme and sometimes dangerous circumstances in order to access one of the safest and most common healthcare procedures. In Missouri and several other states, abortion is banned except in a medical emergency. In other words, in order for doctors to avoid prison time, instead of treating a patient before their health condition becomes life-threatening, doctors must now contemplate how sick is sick enough before providing life-saving abortion care. People will suffer unnecessary harm as doctors wait for permission from hospital lawyers to tell them that they can proceed. In some circumstances, the abortion care will come too late. Not only is this agenda unpopular, it is deeply anti-life. We already know that abortion care is inextricably linked to maternal health outcomes. And in Missouri, Black maternal mortality is 4 times higher than that for white women. Forcing people to continue pregnancies they do not want or cannot bear will cost lives. Forcing people into parenting without passing policies that address childcare costs, paid family leave, or a formula shortage will cost lives. The anti-abortion agenda is anti-life and hypocrisy at its worst. I have a plea for our allies, too. Those of you who have long stood with us and committed to protecting reproductive freedom. Listen to those of us who have been warning about this moment for years. Work with critical access states to ensure that abortion remains accessible. Use every bit of your power to do something. On June 24th, 1 hour before the Supreme Court dismantled abortion rights, I was sitting next to HHS Secretary Javier Becerra, along with partners and allies in Missouri, including the Congresswoman from the 1st District, Representative Cori Bush. In that meeting, we asked the Biden administration to declare a public health emergency to support the patients who will have to flee their home states for abortion care. As 36 million people of reproductive age now or soon will live in a state where abortion is banned. Senators, I come before you tired, frustrated, and angry. Those of us on the front lines, the abortion activists that President Biden's team just this weekend referred to as out of step, we are the ones who are holding back this public health crisis that's about to sweep the country. I speak on behalf of my colleagues, abortion providers and advocates. We deserve better. We need action, and we need it now. We're out of time. Thank you for inviting me to share about this moment in history, which I am certain will be a stain as we move forward. Abortion is normal, it is an act of love, and it is fundamentally health care.
Thank you, Dr. Mcnicholas. We'll now go into 5-minute rounds for the members to ask questions, and I'll begin. Dr. Mcnicholas, you've already addressed this issue, but I want to return to it because I think it is critically important. There are some who say that those who support the abortion procedures are alarmist and exaggerating the danger that women face because of the Dobbs decision. I think you've alluded to this, and I want to make it part of the record. The United States already has the highest maternal mortality rates of comparable nations. In other words, more women die in childbirth in this country than most other countries. We are one of only 13 countries where the maternal mortality rate is worse today than it was 25 years ago. Every year, 900 women nationwide die as a result of pregnancy-related complications. 70,000 suffer near-fatal outcomes. Women of color are 3 times more likely to die as a result of pregnancy than white women. and yet it could get much worse. A recent study estimated that a nationwide ban on abortion would increase maternal mortality in the United States by 20%. Among black women, the estimate is an increase of 33%. By ending the constitutional right to abortion, the Supreme Court has ensured that maternal mortality in the United States will increase. In states, incidentally, with the most restrictive abortion laws already, there's a 7% higher maternal mortality rate than states with fewer restrictions. Tell me the practical side of this, the cases that you've run into as a practicing physician, as a doctor, where you had to make this decision, life or death decision, when it comes to the mother.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. I first want to acknowledge the fact that you're right. This country has a disappointing and quite embarrassing maternal mortality rate already, and we are on the cusp of seeing that rate increase. The 6 states with the highest maternal mortality rate are 6 states that immediately moved to ban abortion, and that is not a coincidence. In addition to the public health implications that we won't know for years, impacts on long-term maternal mortality rate, we are already seeing mass chaos among OBGYNs, emergency room physicians, and quite frankly, pharmacists. We're talking about people being denied or delayed care for pregnancy and non-pregnancy related conditions. Lupus, arthritis, cancer, medications that we use frequently to control those conditions are being denied to patients because they might also contribute to miscarriage or can be used for abortion and other indications. OBGYNs who are sitting on patients in emergency rooms while they bleed, while their vital signs become unstable, while they're waiting for hospital lawyers to decide, is this patient sick enough? When the consequence of violating a law is criminal, doctors are put in impossible positions where they know the right care, they know what to do to help somebody, but yet they have to wait, making folks sustain totally preventable harm. And it is quite embarrassing and should be shameful.
Professor Bridges, you made a reference in your testimony to 1868, and you used as an example when Justice Alito referred to the historical precedents and went back to 1868, that at that moment in American history, women were not legally entitled to vote. I also note that at that moment, women could not own property or enter into a contract in the United States of America. And in 1868, not a single woman practiced law in the United States. And that was the historic basis that Justice Alito wanted to use for the Dobbs decision. Would you comment again on that particular aspect of this when we talk about historic precedent?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. It's a complete choice to elevate the year 1868 as the moment of constitutional significance in terms of constitutional interpretation. Again, it was a period of time in which women were simply not part of the body politic. It wasn't until social movements that occurred later in this country's history in the 1970s that we started to see movements for women's equality, and women could actually become something that we can call equal citizens. I also wanted to give me time to just note the selectivity of Justice Alito's historical inquiry. He chooses to elevate 1868 in the context of abortion rights because it will lead to the result that he likes. In other cases, in other contexts, he doesn't engage in a historical inquiry at all. In his affirmative action jurisprudence, 1868 is also the relevant time that we should look for when interpreting the Equal Protection Clause. We should be interrogating what the framers thought when they ratified the Equal Protection Clause in terms of, did they think that there ought to be race-conscious efforts to make newly freed, formerly enslaved people of color members of the body politic? If he engages in historical inquiry, he will have to lead to a conclusion that affirmative action is constitutional. He doesn't engage in that historical inquiry because it will not lead to the results that he likes.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor Stratton, I'm a little over my time, but I want to give you a chance to respond to efforts that are underway on the maternal mortality issue and protection of women. And I have to give you fair warning that your statement that Illinois is a unique Midwestern state on this subject is going to be challenged by a senator from Minnesota. Lieutenant Governor.
So thank you for that question and just the ability to add what the witnesses have already stated. In addition to that, I would point out that this will not only just have a disproportionate impact On Black women, when we often talk about the issue of maternal mortality, then we raise the issue of how it disproportionately impacts Black women, but the issue of restricting abortion access, the abortion bans and other restrictions also will have a disproportionate impact on those women who are from lower income communities, on immigrant women, on young women, on women from rural communities, on our LGBTQ plus community. There are so many wide-ranging ramifications, and the bottom line is that everyone should be able to decide for themselves what is best for their own health care in conjunction with their physician. This is not something that should be decided with a political agenda. It is not something that should be a decision made by politicians. These are decisions that are very personal and should be made. And when they have health implications, as we're talking about maternal mortality, then this is an example of why it is not a politician's determination. It should be that individual's decision with their healthcare professional.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Senator Grassley.
Ms. Maskey, I'm going to repeat some statistics you gave. According to Charlotte Lozier Institute, pro-life pregnancy centers performed 486,000 free ultrasounds, 731,000 free pregnancy tests last year. 291,000 clients attended parenting and prenatal education classes, and 2,500 locations offer material assistance that babies need when a family can't support it. So can you tell us how you help pregnant women? And even more importantly, would there be a disparate impact on these communities if your centers weren't available?
Yes, Senator Grassley, thank you for the question. We give women free medical care, free parenting classes and baby supplies, free medical and emotional support after an abortion. Along with that, pregnancy care centers throughout the entire country give $266 million a year of free medical care and resources to the community nationwide. It is important to know that pregnancy centers often support women even after they've had an abortion. As a matter of fact, we had a 19-year-old young woman come into our clinic who did not want an abortion. She was forced to take the abortion pill by her parents. She testified to the fact that when she took the abortion pill, she was isolated in a bathroom all by herself. There was no support. There was no doctor there. There was no nurse there. There was no pain medication other than ibuprofen, and she testifies to physically going into labor on the floor, on the toilet, and in her bathroom. And at one point, she said she looked down, and what they told her was a clump of cells was a fully formed baby laying on the floor. Devastated, she claims she picked that baby up and carried it around, put it in a plastic bag, and several weeks later took it to a memorial and buried it. This is not healthcare. A woman alone by herself in a bathroom experiencing tremendous pain and seeing the effects of it. A young woman who has an abortion at an abortion clinic never has to drive by that abortion clinic ever again. But a young woman who goes into labor on the floor in her bathroom and physically sees everything that comes out of her and experiences the pain in the midst of that moment has to wake up every single morning and relive that experience. Again, this is not healthcare.
Ms. Harley, whether it's an unelected court or the thinnest possible margins in Congress, we need to respect our institutions and their limitations. The Supreme Court shouldn't be taking power away from legislatures to make national policy from the bench. Neither should the filibuster be destroyed to enact a bill that allows abortion until birth, a policy 8 in 10 Americans reject. So to you, what are the constitutional and practical problems with the various proposals that we've seen to enshrine abortion at the federal level?
Well, there are a couple of problems. As a constitutional matter, Congress does not have the authority in its constitutional powers to impose a national abortion regime upon the states. You can't find that in the Commerce Clause. You can't find that anywhere in Congress's powers. That would be a gross overreach and would trample on principles of federalism. As a policy matter, it's also problematic. The example that I'm aware of, the current so-called Women's Health Protection Act, which has a nice name, but if you read it, is actually an abortion on demand through all 9 months of pregnancy bill. That as a policy it's horrific. It's completely out of step with what the American people want. Americans are overwhelmingly opposed to abortion on demand up to the moment of birth. And the Women's Health Protection Act would actually allow a baby to be dismembered, torn apart limb from limb just before entering the birth canal for any reason whatsoever or no reason at all. It would also overturn hundreds of state laws that are modest and common sense and that protect life. So as a constitutional matter, I don't think a congressional attempt to mandate abortion would be upheld in court. And as a policy matter, it's a horrific idea, and I think we should be embarrassed that the United States is even considering something like that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Grassley. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was just thinking back 50 years ago when abortion was legal, and I was sitting on the California Women's Board of Terms and Parole, setting sentences for women who committed abortion. And I remember how terrible it was. Before the Supreme Court decided Roe v. Wade, nearly 50 years ago, abortions were risky, they were difficult to obtain. Women would travel to Mexico to seek an abortion from an unauthorized provider, or they would attempt to self-induce an abortion using dangerous and potentially life-threatening methods. We know from those times, and I know from those times, that banning abortion care will not stop people from seeking abortions. It will only make abortion more deadly. Overturning Roe does nothing more than endanger the lives of women. I'm really deeply concerned that state efforts to ban and criminalize abortion will once again emerge and will harm the ability of women to seek vital medical care. So, Dr. Mcnicholas, from your experience as a provider, what impact have you seen from these state abortion bans on women who are seeking reproductive health care? And Professor Bridges, what can Congress do to help protect people seeking an abortion?
Thank you so much for the question, Senator Feinstein. I will start by saying and acknowledging and agreeing that the legalization of abortion has never been the driver of its necessity. That was true before Roe, and that will be true now post-Dobbs. Pre-decision, there were states like Missouri who had made it so difficult that the Roe decision was inadequate and pushed abortion out of access for many already. The reality is right now in this moment, today, there are thousands, tens of thousands of people who are navigating which bill can go unpaid, how to find somebody to watch their kids, making sure their transportation can get them thousands of miles to the next clinic, all in search of basic health care. What we know is that abortion bans and restrictions alike disproportionately affect people who live in marginalized identities and are worst for people who exist in the intersections of oppression. We will see more people be harmed by these decisions, both as pregnancy outcomes as well as people who are being denied and delayed care outside of the abortion realm.
As of this past weekend, 21 states either have an abortion ban in effect, are expected to implement a ban soon, or have severely restricted abortion access in the state. These bans are forcing women to leave their home states in order to seek safe and legal reproductive health care. Some states with abortion bans in place have begun discussing the potential next step of banning people from traveling to seek abortion care outside of their home state. My home state, California, recently passed legislation that would help protect abortion providers and individuals from other states who seek abortion care in California. Professor Bridges, if some states take this next step of banning travel to seek abortions, what legal protection should states hoping to protect abortion access put in place to prevent harm to patients visiting their states for care?
Thank you for the question, Senator. We have a clearly established constitutional right to travel in Saines versus Roe in 1999. The Supreme Court interpreted the Constitution as protecting a right to travel, but that does not mean that that right is secure. We've seen in Dobbs that 50 years of precedent can be overturned just simply based on the membership of the court. I want to back up just a little bit in response to your question about what can Congress do in response to the reversal of Roe. Congress can and should repeal the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment prevents federal funds from being used on abortion care. It has made it impossible for low-income people to rely on their health insurance, Medicaid to cover the cost of abortion care. It also makes it impossible for people who rely on Indian health services, Native people, to turn to the clinics and the facilities that fulfill the federal government's obligation to Native people to provide health care. Also, I just want to note that Congress can and should pass federal legislation that creates a statutory right to an abortion. The Women's Health Protection Act is a nice first step. There is no question that Congress has the authority to pass the WHPA. This is because health care they have the power under the Commerce Clause. Health care is an activity that substantially affects interstate commerce. The court in NFIB versus Sebelius, which upheld the Affordable Care Act, did not cast doubt on Congress's ability to regulate health care because it is an activity that substantially affects interstate commerce. So Congress certainly has the power to pass the WHPA and other efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It would be helpful, any statement with particulars in it that we would care to put into writing and submit to the committee, I would certainly appreciate. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Feinstein. Senator Cotton.
Over the last few months, we've seen a marked increase in violence and intimidation by pro-abortion groups. Left-wing mobs have gathered outside the homes of Supreme Court justices to try to intimidate them and affect their decision in the Dobbs case in blatant violation of federal law. Yet the weak and hopelessly partisan Attorney General Merrick Garland refused to enforce that federal law. It's gotten so bad that the Supreme Court marshal has had to go to the governors of Virginia and Maryland and plead with them to protect our Supreme Court justices at their homes. In one case, a Democratic hitman even traveled from California to try to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh at his home. But it's not just Supreme Court justices targeted. Pro-abortion groups, including one calling itself Jane's Revenge, has claimed credit for firebombing a pro-life organization in Madison, Wisconsin, and numerous other firebombings, attacks, and acts of vandalism against pro-life groups in more than a dozen states. The same group even attacked and vandalized the campaign office of a Republican congressman. This weekend, 3 separate churches in Maryland were all attacked, all 3 vandalized and desecrated, and 2 were set on fire. Those attacks are currently under investigation, but are also believed to be related to pro-abortion causes and groups. I'd like to ask each of you, starting with Lieutenant Governor, do you condemn the violent attacks, firebombings, and vandalism by groups like Jane's Revenge?
Thank you, Senator. Let me just say, I will emphasize that violence against anyone is wrong, and no one should experience threats to their safety or their well-being. But I would also urge everyone to bring the same energy to the attacks that are taking place against abortion providers and clinics. All across the board, violence is unacceptable. And we know that we are seeing violent acts as well as threats and attacks also on abortion providers and clinics. And that also needs to be addressed with that same energy. We know that arson, bombings, assaults, which have increased exponentially. Stalkings have gone up 600% since 2020 against those that are abortion providers. So, no, I condemn any acts of violence and absolutely do not believe anybody should be experience threats to their well-being and safety. But that should apply equally across the board, and everyone should be working just as hard to make sure that abortion providers and clinics also get that same protection.
Thank you. Ms. Harley.
Again, first timer. I do condemn all violence, and I would just note that abortion is an act of violence against the most innocent and vulnerable human beings.
Thank you. Professor.
I condemn violence, and I would like to note that forced birth is an act of violence as well. I have some additional statistics to share. There's been a 450% increase in blockades at clinics that provide abortion services, a 163% increase in the planting of hoax devices and suspicious packages at clinics that provide abortion care, 129% increase in invasions at clinics that provide abortion care, and 128% increase in assault and battery. So yes, we should keep that same energy across the board and protect everyone who's providing abortion care.
Ms. Matsky.
Yes, I also condemn that violence. Violence should never be carried out on anyone at any time. And pregnancy centers here recently, since the overturning, the violence has been overwhelming that we have sustained, and the amount of money we've had to spend to protect ourselves just so we can offer free services to women is unbelievable.
Doctor.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the outrage for the violence. In fact, my own family would appreciate some outrage in protection of ourselves. Dr. Lynn Weller, murdered in 1977, would have appreciated some outrage. Dr. David Gunn, murdered in 1993. Dr. John Britton in 1994. James Barrett, a volunteer, murdered in 1994. Shannon Lowney, murdered at the age of 25 in 1994. Leanne Nichols, 38, murdered in 1994. Dr. Barnett Slepian, 1998, murdered in Buffalo, New York, after returning home from his synagogue, and just hours after his wife forwarded the threat to the police. Robert Sanderson, an off-duty police officer at a clinic, murdered by who everyone now knows as Eric Rudolph in 1998. And of course, Dr. George Tiller in 2009, murdered in his own church, would have appreciated your outrage as well.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear an answer to my question. Do you condemn the violence committed by groups like Jane's Revenge?
Echoing all of my fellow panelists here, I absolutely condemn violence against everyone, including abortion providers.
Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. And by the way, thank you for that answer. That was, going through the names, I think really reiterates to many people up here that we condemn violence, but there have been a lot of people who've lost their lives simply by trying to guarantee women what were once their guaranteed rights under the Constitution, and now is in our hands. For nearly 50 years, Roe v. Wade protected a woman's right to make her own health care decisions, ensuring that women, their families, and their doctors were in charge of the most personal choices in their life, not politicians. This ruling means that not only will women receive different treatment under the law than men, but there will be, as we've discussed today, a patchwork of laws across the country. Look at what we're seeing right now. Louisiana passed a law that subjects abortion providers to criminal penalties. In Missouri, a bill was recently introduced that would allow private citizens to sue people who help women leave the state to get abortion care. And Mississippi's governor refused to rule out banning contraception. So as Senator Durbin noted, our state, like Illinois, is also an island in the heartland, but a good place. And I'm very proud that our state has stood up in Minnesota for reproductive rights of women. After the Dobbs decision, I met with a group of healthcare workers from the Planned Parenthood Clinic in Moorhead, Minnesota, and I talked to the head of the Red River Falls Women's Clinic in Fargo, North Dakota. She has resorted to a GoFundMe page in order to make sure that she can keep providing services in the upper Midwest, and in fact is moving her clinic to Minnesota. All of the providers that I've talked to have been resolute in their desire to continue to serve the health care needs of women. So I would start with you, Dr. Bridges. Because Minnesota is surrounded by states with abortion restrictions, providers expect to see 10 to 25% more people coming to our state. Can you talk about the strain that a sudden increase in women seeking care has on both patients and providers?
Absolutely, I can speak on that, but I also will invite the Lieutenant Governor Stratton to weigh in as well. We saw that after Texas passed SB 8, effectively ending abortion in the state after 6 weeks of pregnancy before most people know that they are pregnant. There was an incredible influx of patients from Texas in clinics in the surrounding states, Oklahoma and Kansas. Some clinics reported an 1,000% increase in patients from Texas after SB 8 went into effect. Kansas, some clinics in Kansas provided information that 50% of their clients were now from Texas. So that makes it difficult, of course, for people from Texas to access abortion care because now they have to travel hundreds of miles for abortion care. But it also makes it difficult for the residents of Oklahoma and Kansas to access the care in their states because the supply is simply cannot meet the demand.
And given some of the things I mentioned, are you concerned that under the court sweeping decision there are no limits on what states can do to make it nearly impossible for women to seek care?
So there are limits, right? I mentioned Sands versus Roe, which was decided in 1999, in which the Supreme Court held that there was a constitutional right to travel. However, we have seen that the Supreme Court cares very little for precedent. The Supreme Court doesn't feel bound by precedent. And so if that precedent leads to a result that it doesn't like, we can expect it to be reversed, just as we saw Roe reversed simply because of the membership of the court.
Okay, one last question. I'm concerned of you that private health data could put providers and people seeking abortions at risk. One report showed that it only costs about $160 to buy a week's worth of location data on people who visited Planned Parenthood. That's why Senator Baldwin and I have partnered together to urge the FTC to regulate data brokers who are selling data about people seeking abortions. Yesterday, the FTC issued a statement committing to fully enforcing the law against illegal use of highly sensitive data. In the wake of the Dobbs decision, do you agree that it is important to protect data privacy, particularly in states that have outlawed abortion?
It is essential that we protect data privacy. Whenever we're online, we leave a digital footprint. That footprint can now be used as incriminating evidence if prosecutors are interested in pressing criminal charges against people seeking basic health care.
Okay, very, very good. Thank you. Just one last thing, Lieutenant Governor, if you wanted to add anything on the front of the states like Illinois and Minnesota and the impact on these states.
I want to begin, Senator, by acknowledging the great leadership in the state of Minnesota. And I will also just add to your question regarding the protection of data and privacy issues. We know that the potential criminalization of patients coming to our state is certainly of top of mind in Illinois, but it's not just the patients, it's also the abortion care providers that also could potentially risk that same sort of criminalization. And so we are working with our state's leaders, are gathering to talk about how we can continue to expand and further enshrine reproductive rights into state law, because again, everyone should be able to feel safe and be able to have access to health care between them and their physician.
Very good. And our Governor, Tim Walz, and Peggy Flanagan, our Lieutenant Governor, I know great respect, as I do, for you and Governor Pritzker. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Lee? I'm sorry, I think maybe Senator Cornyn is first. You two want to work it out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's important we focus on what we're actually discussing today. We are talking about procedures that culminate in and have as their sole intended purpose the termination of a baby's life. These are babies. It's also important that we recognize, in response to those who have said that the Dobbs decision was somehow undemocratic, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the Dobbs decision was a victory for Republican democracy. There really is no way to argue otherwise with any credibility. What the court did in Dobbs was to return this question of whether or in what circumstances abortion will be allowed, returning that back to the people and to their elected lawmakers. This is a decision that is not taken off the table by the Constitution. And because it's not taken off the table by the Constitution, it belongs to the people, who can exercise that decision through their elected lawmakers. The American people will now be able to say whether and in what circumstances and in what places abortion will be regulated. This is how Republican democracy in America works. This is how our republic was always intended and established to function. Justice Alito, my former boss, in his well-written majority opinion, explained this point well. He said, quote, "Our decision returns the issue of abortion to those legislative bodies, and it allows women on both sides of the abortion issue to seek to affect the legislative process by influencing public opinion, lobbying legislators, voting and running for office," close quote. That's at page 65 of the Dobbs majority opinion. Seems to me that the abortion industry and the left and those incumbent politicians whose campaigns are funded by the abortion industry have gone to great lengths to scare the American people, convincing them that Dobbs does something that it doesn't do. It saddens me that they're doing all of this for the cause of saying that it's okay, and in fact it's protected by the Constitution, to exterminate, to extinguish an unborn human life. It makes me wonder whether those making these scurrilous arguments are simply afraid of American Republican democracy, simply afraid of the American people, simply afraid that when able to make this decision on their own, freed from the judicial oligarchy that has reigned over this era, this area of the law for the last 49 years, that they won't make the same decision that the radical left would make. That seems to me to be the most plausible explanation for why they're so upset and why they're calling it undemocratic. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's also important to note that this reign falls disproportionately on some communities. It falls disproportionately on some races more than others. Black babies are at greater risk of being aborted than white babies. A New York City Health Department report, one that was released just about 4 years ago, found that between 2012 and 2016, when this study was conducted, that black mothers aborted 136,426 babies, while giving birth to only 118,127 babies. That's right, thousands of more black babies were aborted than born in New York City during that relevant time period. It shouldn't come as a surprise as you consider that Planned Parenthood's founder, Margaret Sanger, was a big fan of eugenics, and her plans were not what anyone would want to defend today on that front. She's someone who wanted to, quote unquote, assist the race toward the elimination of the unfit. These are not laudable goals. Ms. Harley, these reports on the black women, the rate at which black women in New York City are getting abortions, they're heartbreaking. They're breathtaking. I hope to see states enacting stronger protections for life, including, among other things, laws prohibiting abortions based on the race, sex, or disability of the baby. I hope these laws would protect all babies, including black babies. So in your view, Ms. Harley, is race, sex, or disability a valid reason for aborting an unborn baby?
Absolutely not. No one should be discriminated against based on their race or their sex or their genetic makeup. Certainly no one should be killed because of any of those factors. These are the sorts of laws that states have been attempting to pass to protect the most vulnerable citizens from fatal, lethal discrimination simply based on who they are or what they might look like. And this is what Roe has blocked states from doing. The people of the states were enacting, voting for lawmakers who would enact these good policies, and Roe was blocking it. But now the power has been given back to the people of the states to choose the sort of life-affirming, life-protecting policies that they want in their states and in their communities.
Mr. Chairman, I see my time's expired. I do want to note that what Ms. Harley just said is very legitimate, and the doomsday calls from those on the left are ignoring common sense. They're ignoring what human instinct tells us about protecting the most vulnerable among us. Members of this committee, including some who are now attacking the Dobbs decision, once shared these views. And so, Mr. Chairman, as I wrap up my remarks, I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a copy of a letter that you wrote on August 4th, 1989, in which you said, among other things, quote, "I believe we should end abortion on demand," and, quote, "I continue to believe the Supreme Court's decision in Roe versus Wade should be reversed." Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, I thank Senator Lee, and now Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lieutenant Governor Stratton, I completely agree with you that it is the woman, not a bunch of politicians, who should decide her bodily autonomy. As I listen to all of my colleagues who support the Supreme Court's recent decision, they lose sight, in my view, intentionally. They lose sight of the fact that who should be making the decision about what to do with our own bodies, us or a bunch of politicians. Professor Bridges, you noted that Justice Alito chose 1868 as the historical basis for his decision in overturning Roe. And I agree with you. What is so special about 1868? And not only that, with the attitude or the approach of originalism, the justices who take that approach go all the way back to our founding fathers and pretend that they know what our founding fathers meant when they drafted the Constitution. I use the word pretend because who the heck would know what our founding fathers meant? Is there any reference to AR-15 rifles in our Constitution? No. So you noted that this is an outcome-based approach to our Constitution, and that is what Justice Alito applies. And when this committee had the hearing on the now Justices Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Comey Barrett, of course they said Roe was precedent. Every single decision of the Supreme Court is a precedent, but the one group that can overturn precedent is the Supreme Court, and they are very busy doing so. And in fact, I want to note, and I'm sure you're familiar, Professor, with the decision that was made overturning Abood, which was basically a 40-year-old Supreme Court precedent that enabled public sector unions to collect union fees. And in a decision called Janus, they just very summarily overturned that 40-year decision, thanks to the fact that Justice Gorsuch got on the court, because when Justice Alito died and they had a previous decision called Fredericks, it was a 4-4 decision. The minute Justice Gorsuch got on that court, it was a 5-4 decision overturning Abood. So that is what the Supreme Court is busy doing, overturning precedent. I don't know what's going to happen to other decisions that protect constitutional rights, such as what Justice Thomas signaled, Obergefell, the same-sex marriage protection. That could be out the window if the court applies to these kinds of cases a rational basis test rather than strict scrutiny. So, Professor, do you share the concern that I have about where this court is going to go with some of these other decisions that had earlier been made?
Absolutely. I am very concerned about where the court is going to go. The logic of the Dobbs decision, as the method of constitutional interpretation that the majority uses in the Dobbs decision, should frighten everyone who holds dear these rights that are necessary for people to live fully human lives with dignity in this country. Obergefell versus Hodges, finding that there is a right to marry someone of the same sex, If you interrogate what was happening in 1868, no such right exists. Lawrence versus Texas, finding that there is a right to be free from criminal punishment for consensual sexual contact with an adult. Such a right didn't exist in 1868. Griswold versus Connecticut, Skinner versus Oklahoma, Pierce versus Society of Sisters, Meyer versus Nebraska. I could go on and on. So these rights that are important for marginalized people, vulnerable people need these rights. Those rights simply were not contemplated by the people who drafted and ratified the Constitution in 1789, in 1791, or in 1868. So we should all be terrified.
Agree with you. We have a radical group of very conservative justices who are going to be making further decisions like this. I have a question for Dr. Mcnicholas. You talked about the chaos that has been created as a result of this decision, and I've been talking with some doctors in Hawaii. By the way, Hawaii was the first state in the union to decriminalize abortion before the Roe decision. So in talking with some of the doctors, there is even an potential impact on what doctors, or soon-to-be doctors, are taught in medical school. For example, DNC is a procedure that is utilized for miscarriages. Could medical schools in states like Texas no longer teach doctors how to do DNCs because they may be accused of performing an abortion?
I appreciate the question, Senator. Yes, in fact, we will be creating an entire cohort of physicians who are underprepared to take care of pregnancy emergencies. I think it's important to note that medications and procedures are simply that. What changes is the indication. So the medications we use for medication abortion, the procedures that we use to perform procedures are the same exact medicines and procedures we use for people who are experiencing pregnancy loss.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Roanoke. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of you for taking the time to be here with us today. I really appreciate it. Ms. Hartley, I want to come to you first, if I may. The Dobbs decision, I've been so interested to see the way different legal scholars have approached this, and I had read that Justice Ginsburg had weighed in on the failures of Roe, and noting, and I'm going to quote from her, she said, "It seemed entirely to remove the ball from the legislator's court," end quote. And Justice Alito had quoted Professor John Hart Ely's characterization that Roe was, and I'm quoting his statement, not constitutional law. So as you look at this, how do you explain the flawed reasoning of Roe and how Dobbs corrected the flaw?
Well, that's correct. Legal scholars on the right and the left have roundly criticized Roe's reasoning. Justice Ginsburg, who was a proponent of abortion as a policy matter, recognized that its reasoning was fundamentally flawed, and she actually predicted that it would very likely be overturned. If I can connect this to the discussion about the year 1868, the reason that is the touch point is because that abortion advocates have insisted that the right to abortion somehow emanates out of the penumbras of non-existent words in the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, or they also sometimes say it may be in the 4th or the 5th or the 9th or other amendments. It's not there in the text, but 1868 is the touch point because the 14th Amendment argument, the due process argument, is what the abortion advocates have relied on.
Okay, then let's turn to why the states are in the best position to handle this, because I read the Harvard-Harris poll. 44% of those polled wanted their state legislatures to set the abortion standards. Only 31% wanted Congress to do this, and only 25% wanted judges. So why are the states in the best position to do this in a fair and equitable way?
That's how the people get their voice heard, is that they through their elected lawmakers in their states, have a voice and a vote in enacting the policy. And in 1973, 46 states completely protected life with extremely limited exceptions, and Roe overturned that. So even that recently, that's what the American people wanted.
So what advice would you give states that are looking at taking this up?
This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity, finally, that states have had the shackles removed from Roe's judicial power grab. It's an opportunity for the people to have a voice through their elected lawmakers to enact policies that support the dignity of women, that protect unborn life, that protect the health and safety and welfare of the citizens, and protect the integrity of the medical profession to remove this barbaric procedure that destroys families, destroys communities, and has ended the lives of more than 60 million babies.
And I've talked to women on all sides of this issue, as you can well imagine. And I find it so interesting once they realize that much of what they've heard in the mainstream media about there being a federal abortion ban is incorrect, and they realize this goes to the states. That changes the nature of the conversation. Ms. Matzke, I want to come to you for just a moment. Planned Parenthood gets about $500 million a year that they can use to fund clinic work and provide health care. But what I have heard from many of the clinics in Tennessee is that Planned Parenthood doesn't provide the services that they need for maternal care, the services that they need post pregnancy. So talk with me a little bit about the services, what people are asking for. I've thought this would be interesting to us as a committee, Mr. Chairman. When we talk about all this money that Planned Parenthood gets, but then they don't meet these needs for women who are pregnant and do want to carry that baby to term and have that baby. When they come to you, what services are they asking you for that Planned Parenthood doesn't provide?
Well, first off, thank you, Mrs. Blackburn, for asking that question, because it is vitally important for everyone here to recognize the fact that as the director of Alternatives Pregnancy Center, it is my responsibility to go out and raise by myself non-government funds over $1.5 million. Every year, I have to figure out where $1.5 million is going to come from so we can provide free services to women facing unplanned pregnancies. And ironically, where we are at in Sacramento, California, Planned Parenthood actually refers patients to us. Once a woman walks in to them, this has happened countless times in the last multiple months, if they do not choose abortion, they are referred to Alternatives Pregnancy Center to be cared for. Alternatives Pregnancy Center offers all the support that they need, medical as well as material support. So the fact that Planned Parenthood sees the value of who we are and what we offer to women, I think is important for everyone here to understand.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, I think as we look at this issue, this is something that we would want to look at as to why they do not offer that full array of health care services for women. Why are they choosing to make that referral to an agency to receive those full services when they're receiving hundreds of millions and billions of dollars? I thank you. I yield my time.
Thanks, Senator Blackburn. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses for being here. There's been a certain amount of talk during this hearing about the environment in which the justices who wrote the Dobbs decision have had to operate since that decision, and I just wanted to flag in the general category of protest behavior the experience that I had with clinics in Rhode Island in the 90s when I was U.S. Attorney in Rhode Island. And I flag it in part because during Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's hearings, a witness was brought forward to propose the narrative that these engagements between protesters and people seeking services at clinics were done in a spirit of peaceful and loving engagement. And I lived a very different experience than that in Rhode Island and in Massachusetts. When I became U.S. Attorney, the environment outside of our Planned Parenthood clinic in Providence was so hostile that we were well aware of it in law enforcement, and Planned Parenthood had had to figure out ways to have people escort women coming for services into their premises through extremely hostile and abusive crowds. And it reached a very bloody culmination in December of 1994 when a clinic protester, we think that the protesters went back and forth between Massachusetts and Rhode Island pretty often. A clinic protester went into a clinic in Massachusetts and murdered the receptionist and shot up the place, wounding others, and then moved on to another clinic outside of Boston and murdered an employee and shot others, and then disappeared. Didn't know where they were going. I got the news right away, and I called up the U.S. Marshal, and I said, nobody knows where this guy is, right? And they said, nobody knows where this guy is. And because we knew of all of the threats and all of the abusive behavior that was happening outside of the Planned Parenthood clinic in Providence, I said, well, since we don't know where he is, we could be next. We'd better get over there right now. So he and I went, and it was a cold December day, and we just stood outside of the Planned Parenthood clinic, and the marshals and FBI agents ended up joining us, and then the Providence police took over security. And as it happened, the shooter drove right by on the highway just a couple hundred yards away and went on southwards, where he was ultimately arrested, I think in Virginia, but he had gone right by. And I'll never know whether he pulled off and drove by and saw the activity and just decided to go on, or whether he was going by anyway. But that was the environment that we were working in with these clinic protesters, and I want to make sure that that is absolutely clear in the record. This business of this all being, peaceful and loving engagement is just not consistent with what I saw with my own eyes and with what the people in those two blood-spattered clinics in Boston had to experience. I want to ask a very narrow question of Dr. Mcnicholas, if I could, and that is whether there are occasions when, entirely apart from the wishes of the mom, there are circumstances in which a doctor in a pregnancy will make a decision or recommendation for a patient that an abortion is now medically necessary, either to save the life of the mother or for other reasons in which it is the independent medical conclusion of the doctor and doctors have to make hard decisions all the time, that the best decision in this case is that you have to go ahead with the procedure, either to save the mother's life or for the sake of other children or whatever. Is that a thing that happens in real life?
Thank you so much, Senator. And before I answer your question briefly, I just want to again state the names of the two women that were murdered that you referenced, and that's Shannon Lowney, she was 25, and Leanna Nichols was 38.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Every single day, we see pregnancy complications that put people's lives at risk. And it is imperative that physicians have every tool at their disposal to be able to make recommendations. And I say recommendations intentionally because we never tell people what they have to do. We give them information, we tell them what the risk is and the potential complications,
and what effect
including
is
death.
Dobbs, compounded by these anti-abortion laws in state legislatures, having on doctors' ability to make those decisions and provide those services to women when medically necessary?
In addition to the hat I wear as Chief Medical Officer for Planned Parenthood, I'm also an elected official for the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. And we are hearing every single day from our members that they are afraid. They're afraid to make decisions that they know are the best health care for people. They're afraid of how sick they have to wait for people to get before they can take care of them. It is, health conditions evolve, sometimes minute to minute, sometimes day to day, sometimes it takes weeks. But the truth is that if we are setting up a system by which we are forcing people to sustain preventable morbidity and mortality, we are totally leaving an entire population of people behind. We are telling women that not only are they not allowed the decision to control their own body, but now we're not going to allow you to control your own body and make decisions when it means that you could potentially be leaving the 3 children you have behind when you die from that delayed care. It is quite disgraceful. It happens every single day, and ACOG is hearing every single day from people on the ground, right? I tell my 12-year-old all the time, intent and impact are different. And whatever the intent is of overturning Roe, the impact is that it is utter chaos and people are being harmed.
Thank you for telling us about that impact.
Thanks, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs was a victory for democracy in America. Abortion is an issue on which the American people have strong and passionate views and disagree, as the witnesses here at this hearing demonstrate. Those disagreements have been longstanding, and the way our Constitution operates, typically on issues in which there is sharp disagreement, it is the democratic process that resolves that disagreement. When the Supreme Court decided Roe v. Wade in 1973, 7 unelected judges said to the American people, your views don't matter. Your desire to protect innocent life doesn't matter. We know better than you, and we are going to prevent you from making decisions about protecting life. The consequence of that has been 5 decades of deep political division because the democratic process was prevented from operating. Now that a 6-3 majority of the Supreme Court has overturned that decision, questions of abortion will return to the elected branches of government. The democratic process will be allowed to operate. That will mean in bright blue states, tragically, we'll continue to see unlimited abortion on demand. And in redder states, we will see some meaningful restrictions on abortions. And those restrictions will vary state by state, depending on the values and mores of their citizens. That's how our Constitution was meant to operate. If you disagree with the abortion laws in your state, you have an outlet to express that disagreement. You have an outlet to be involved in the political process. You have an outlet to advocate for what you believe the laws should be. You're not forced to live under the rule of unelected judges operating as philosopher kings and decreeing the rules for 330 million Americans. I believe abortion's a tragedy. The over 60 million unborn children who've never breathed a breath of air, who've never lived, who've never danced, who've never hugged, who've never loved. Our country is far poorer for the millions of African American children who never had a chance to live and contribute to our country. Unfortunately, one of the consequences of the court taking this out of the democratic process is today's modern Democrat Party has become radicalized on abortion. The case Planned Parenthood versus Casey, a lot of people don't know that the Casey in question there was Governor Bob Casey, who was a Democrat and was pro-life. Today's Democrat Party has said, if you're pro-life, get the hell out. Your views are not welcome in our party. Part of the reason that Democrats in this hearing are painting the Dobbs decision in such apocalyptic terms is they know their view of abortion, which is unlimited abortion on demand up to the moment of birth, partial birth abortion with government funding, with no parental notification and no parental consent, is supported by a tiny minority of Americans. They know that the voters, when given a chance, don't support that radical view. And I will point out, there was a time when Democrats used to say the same thing. We all remember Bill Clinton, who said he wanted to see abortion safe, legal, and rare. Today's Democrat Party doesn't want it rare. It wants as much abortion as possible. Well, I'll tell you this. When Roe versus Wade was decided, one Democrat who spoke up against it was a fellow named Joseph Robinette Biden, who said in 1974, quote, I don't like the Supreme Court decision on abortion. I think it went too far. I don't think that a woman has a sole right to say what should happen to her body. That was Joe Biden in 1974. And you may say, okay, that was a long time ago. All right, let's go to 2007, just 15 years ago. 2007, Joe Biden. Tim Russert says, you supported that ban on late-term abortions. Biden said, I did, and I do. That was 15 years ago. Just weeks ago, the Democrats in this body voted to strike down every restriction on abortion across this country, including bans on partial birth abortion, and every single Democrat but one voted for it. Now, maybe you might say, you know what, Joe Biden was out of step. Well, there's someone else who had similar views, the chairman of this committee. In a June 1983 letter, the chairman of this committee wrote, quote, I have clearly studied the issue, abortion, in depth, in favor of the Eagleton Amendment, which states clearly that the right to abortion is not guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. The effect of this amendment will be to return us to the legal environment which existed before Roe v. Wade in 1973, signed Richard J. Durbin, Member of Congress. That view continued. In August of 1989, Chairman Durbin wrote, and again I quote, I believe we should end abortion on demand, and at every opportunity I have translated this belief into votes in the House of Representatives. Continued to say, I continue to believe the Supreme Court's decision in Roe v. Wade should be reversed. That was the view of a lot of Democrats not that long ago. But today's Democratic Party is afraid of the voters on this issue. What the Supreme Court has done is returned this deeply personal, deeply important, deeply contentious issues to the voters, to let the American people decide. That's democracy. And all of us should be happy about that.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the women who've come here to testify. I know it's a sacrifice to come in for such an important day. Ms. Harley, can I just ask you a quick question? And just for the sake of time, could you just give me from your heart a yes or no? If Congress were to pass a national abortion ban, would that be something you would support?
I think our laws should protect all human life.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Stratton, there's been a lot, some said by my colleagues about, I seem to imply that that allowing women to have access to safe abortion care is somehow racist against African Americans. Would you take a brief moment to address that for me?
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator, for that question. First and foremost, I would think as we look at the disproportionate impact that abortion bans and restrictions have on Black women in particular, and the harm that has been caused, it is cruel to deny that access to abortion is actually what is liberating for Black women, to be able to have bodily autonomy and the ability to decide what's best for their bodies, for their lives, and their futures. I am the mother, as I said in my opening remarks, of 4 daughters, 3 of whom are adults. And I had to have a very painful conversation with them, first upon the leak decision and then, of course, with the Dobbs ruling, about how could they possibly have fewer rights than their mother had. They should be able to decide for themselves and make a personal decision about what is in their futures. And we've already had a conversation about maternal mortality rates, infant mortality rates related to the racial disparities that are attached to that. So this is to talk about what happens with children and recognizing that after a child is born, that they do not have access to resources. They are not given what's needed to address the systemic racism that they are going to experience throughout their lives, to make sure that there's no help that's given to these families, Black and brown families across our country, in the wake of these abortion bans and restrictions. It's contradictory to so much of what we have heard today. This is not about helping. This is only going to harm and cause immeasurable suffering.
Thank you. And Dr. Bridges and Dr. McNicholas, maybe to that point, I've been looking at just data and seeing that states that provide great access to contraception, free access to contraception, actually lower rates of unwanted pregnancies, like Colorado, lower rates of abortion by empowering women and low-income women in particular. In the dissent of the Dobbs case, they pointed out what to me was absurd, the reality that many of the states moving to create the most restrictive bans on abortion are the very states that aren't doing the things that are obvious to lower the rates of maternal death, like expanding Medicaid. And so this argument that they value life by not providing access to contraception, by not expanding Medicaid, their states have some of the worst records for women dying in pregnancy-related causes. It seems rank hypocrisy to me, and especially as it affects African-American women who die 3 times more. And I was wondering if you just maybe, Dr. Nichols and Dr. Bridges, could just as cogently as possible in the limited time I have left, can you just talk about how these bans in the name of life are actually causing so much more death in communities, especially for the most vulnerable women?
I'm just going to take 30 seconds and then I'll pass it to you. Thank you so much for that question. I want to also point out that the states that are passing the most restrictive laws around abortion are also the states that are preventing people from voting. Senator Lee, Senator Cruz have talked about, this decision just returned, this Dobbs decision just returns it to the elected representatives of states and people can battle it out in these laboratories of democracy as to whether they want to protect fetal life over the interests of the pregnant person. These are the same states that are stopping people from voting. Texas has the most restrictive voting laws on the books. Texas's SB 8 doesn't represent the will of the majority of Texans. Texas SB 8 represents the will of the majority of Texans that were able to vote. So in order for this to be a democracy, we have to protect voting rights. And I leave it to everyone in this room, as well as the rest of Congress, to protect voting rights so that we can be a real democracy.
With the indulgence of the chair, would you please respond?
Thank you so much. I think it's been well represented here that maternal mortality is the highest in states that are banning abortion and preventing access to things like expanded Medicaid. But I will add one more thing, which is that as a physician who gets to care for many Black women, ultimately at the end of the day, I trust that Black women know what they want and what they need for their own health care.
Thank you. Thank you for the indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornyn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Bridges, you, in your testimony, talked about the prevalence of abortion, the percentage of Black babies that are aborted as opposed to non-Black babies. I think you said 3 or 4 times more Black babies than non-Black babies are aborted. You also talk about systemic racism. Do you see any systemic racism associated with the prevalence of abortion for Black babies as opposed to non-Black babies?
Absolutely. The higher rates of unintended pregnancy that lead to higher abortion rates among Black people is a result of structural racism, systemic racism. I understand systemic racism not to be boogeymen who are